Today's episode is going to be a follow-on from the previous episode where we looked at the Tessar and compared it against the Black Tessar. So it was a comparison video, and we found that the Black Tessar didn't perform as well as the Tessar, the Zebra Tessar. This Tessar seemed to be a little bit soft, softer than it should be. So I had a look into this lens and had a look to see if I could take the elements out, and this happened. The aperture, it fell apart. Don't take out the front element like I've done without expecting that. Right, the lens. Let's look at the lens under a high-powered LED lamp. We can see everything. This shows blemishes, bubbles in the lens, fingerprints, hair, bits of dust, particles of skin, anything, everything. I'm sure it even shows things that just aren't there. This looks awful. You can see that there is fungus if you look carefully. I don't know if you can see on camera, but you can, I think I can definitely see on the corners the fungus creeping into the centre of the view. Now, I don't think that should really affect the picture that drastically. I don't think it should really cause it to be a hell of a lot softer than the other Tessar. Now, I haven't cleaned the other Tessar, I haven't looked into the lens at all, so I'm guessing that one would be, the same. Now, with an extreme amount of force, you need to push this little ring down wearing some rubber gloves, and eventually it will twist free because it's quite tight. Now, gently tap out the lens into the other hand. You'll find that it's a plano-convex type lens. Now, this lens would resolve the image on its own without the need for any of the other lenses, and I'll go into that in a different video, but it basically means that one side of the lens is flat and one side is curved. It does have some fungus, and I'm going to show you how to clean the fungus, and then I'm going to show you how to replace the aperture blades on that Tessar. Now, it's a bit fiddly. I'm going to clean the blades too, but the element inside here isn't that bad. It's not as bad as the first element. But they both need cleaning. While I'm there, I might as well do both. Now, the stuff that I'm using for cleaning is a top secret solution. It's this stuff. Actually, it's not top secret. It's just hydrogen peroxide. 3% hydrogen peroxide with water. So, it's basically water with a bit of bleach. The bleach, the hydrogen peroxide, will basically kill the fungus, and the water will clean the lens. Now, I use a cotton swab to clean the lens. It's sometimes called a Q-tip or a cotton bud. They're great for this kind of thing, but you will need a little cloth, a lint-free cloth as well, because the cotton bud does tend to leave a little residue of fluff afterwards. I tend to use one end for cleaning and the other end for drying. And the only thing you've got to really be careful about with this is that you remember which way round the element goes. And I would recommend that you do wear rubber gloves, because your skin contains acids and oils, and you're going to spend an immense amount of time re-cleaning this if you don't use rubber gloves, because using the rubber gloves you can touch the lens and it doesn't leave a mark. Now, your fingers, on the other hand, every time you slip, or even a little bit of condensation comes off your fingers, and it can foul the lens. But rubber gloves, they just helps a hell of a lot. So you just need to give it a little bit of liquid in there. You don't need a lot. Just a damp cotton swab, really. It's quite easy. I mean, you can get a lot of the debris out. You're not going to get this perfect because you haven't got, I'm guessing you probably haven't got a vacuum to do this in. Now, ideally that's how these things should be, but there will always be some fluff or some particles left in there. I use a tiny little brush to just brush the surface instead of blowing, because I think it sometimes has these little fluffs and threads and things and little particles of dust, they sometimes have an electrical charge, so it kind of sticks to the lens, and blowing doesn't really help, so I like to use a brush instead. But now, as you can see, just by doing that, look how cleaner it is. It's not going to be perfect, like I said, but it is going to be better. The fungus is dead. This will kill it on contact, and it's looking okay. So now we need to clean the other lenses, and we need to get to the aperture. This lens is using the Pixelvalve adapter for the Carl Zeiss Tessar Black version. And it's really easy to put this on. There's just 3 screws and there's nothing underneath. You just simply replace the part with the old part. And if you wanted to go back to M42, it's just a reverse of that. You just simply switch them around. 3 screws. Nothing can be easier than that. So on mine here, I've got hex bolts, because this particular lens had some screws missing when I bought it. So I decided to replace them all. Make sure you have a magnetic screwdriver, because that will help you immensely doing these fiddly little jobs. Now, you can remove the rear element here without affecting the aperture. It's only the front element block that keeps that aperture in place. So the only thing you have to be careful here is that you don't lose the ball bearing like I've just done. Oh, where is it? Ah, okay, here it is. Oh, got it. There. Look at that. Need a magnet for this. So I'm just going to pop over to the other desk and get a magnet. Brilliant. There's a few things that we need to take off from under here, because we want to get this metal ring here out of the tube. We need to take 2 bolts off and then release some of these parts. So I need to remove that part there, which is that little arm there, you can see. So I'm going to start by taking these 2 screws here off. I'm just going to change my adapter on my screwdriver to the slot head instead of the hex, and then it's just a case of applying a little bit of pressure, because sometimes these screws, they do have the addition of a little bit of glue just to keep them in place. My screwdriver here might be a little bit too wide, too thick for this screw, so I may need to change that. But with a bit of force, you can do it anyway. These magnets stick to everything. It's sometimes tricky to film these things, isn't it? You know, I know that I should have better gloves, because you see mostly the back of my hand in a lot of these videos. But I just can't get the camera any closer to this lens. I did think about sticking one on my head, you know, one of those, like those lights that people have, but don't know. That'll be a bit awkward sometimes, I think. So now that I've removed the screws, I need to remove the actuator, I think you'd call it. Now that sits over here, and it grips onto the aperture blade. So the aperture ring has a piece of metal that comes off and fits into there, and we just need to move this out of place. And it's not difficult, you just need to basically wiggle it out carefully. There is a gap there that would just allow it, but you can turn it and make it so that it's difficult to come out. At the moment, I think I've positioned it just right. You'll see that it will fit through now. And you basically just put that to the side. You just don't need that at all until we reassemble it. Don't alter the screw settings on that. This now just comes out, and you can clean it if you want, but it's not essential, that piece. The bit we really want is in there, and to get it we also need to remove the spring arm, which is this thing here. To do that, we need to remove these two screws. It's a really simple design. It's very well built. It's solid. Make sure you put your finger on the underside of this, because you don't want to lose those aperture blades. If you lose them, if you drop them on the floor and you accidentally stand on one, they're so thin that if you bend that, it's going to be horrible. The aperture blades are so thin you wouldn't believe. Probably thinner than a knife. Definitely thinner than a knife. Thinner than a tin can. Wafer thin. Now, getting this out is quite easy, but putting it back in is the trick. Now, you can use tweezers if you like. They're useful, but if you've magnetized your tweezers at all, that can be a real pain. So I tend to use cocktail sticks quite a lot with these things. Now you need to remember which way that went in, so you need to just make a note of that position, roughly where it was, because you'll need to put that back in the same position later. Now those aperture blades, they're all over the place at the moment, but they need to be interlaced. They need to be one on top of the other, following each other around. And the hardest bit is when you come to the end and you need to tuck one underneath the other. But I'll show you what I mean in a minute. So, tip them out, and then you'll need to get your cleaning solution. Now you can use hydrogen peroxide, you can use fairy liquid or detergent, or any detergent. Even abrasive detergent will work, even toothpaste will work if you're really careful and you polish these between your gloves. It just depends on how dirty and oily these blades are. Now mine are quite dirty, they're quite greasy and oily. So I'm going to need some abrasive cleaner on these, so I'm going to pause the video while I do that. But it's completely optional. You can do that. It's self-explanatory. You shouldn't need me to show you that. But start by testing it out with a bit of hydrogen peroxide or a bit of detergent to see how it goes first, like this. You see, on this brush now I do have a little bit of abrasive cleaner, you know, like sink cleaner. You know that stuff that's slightly abrasive, that's like in a yellow bottle, and it's under the kitchen sink and sometimes in the bathroom. That would work just fine on this. Just make sure you rinse it properly afterwards. Cream cleaner, I think they call it. And while you're there, this bit needs to be cleaned, because if you put the clean blades back into a dirty lens, then you're going to get dirty blades again. It doesn't have to be brilliantly clean, it just has to be good enough. And of course, let it sit for a little bit, because you want it to be dry before you put those blades back in. So I'm going to pause the video while it dries a little bit. So now that it's had time to dry, I should be able to place them blades. Now, my blades are sitting here on this old lens cap, and the surface is dry, but underneath there is some water, so I'm going to need a clean cotton bud to just try and soak up a little bit of that liquid. They're looking good, they're looking nice, they're nice and shiny. They look all uniformed. There's no discoloration, which is a good sign. This is a really easy job. I mean, it's tedious, and it depends whether it's worth it for you, but I've done this quite a few times, and I've often thought to myself that it's something that probably is very, very boring and nobody would want to see. There are far better videos on the internet, I think, than what I'm doing now. I mean, I started by looking at other people doing it on YouTube. Now the tweezers is slightly magnetic. It's causing a bit of a nuisance there, because these things are so fragile and light that they're really sticking to anything. The cocktail stick being wood really helps. It's hard to get these in place, but you basically put one on top of the other and go round in a clockwise manner. Each side has a dimple, so one side has a dimple that fits into the slot that you can see on the lens underneath that aperture blade, and the other slot is on the very end of the blade, and that fits into the hinge, I suppose you could call it, which is lying on the desk at the moment. Now, if you sneeze at this point, if you sneeze or knock the table, then you'll have to start over again, because these things are paper thin. And as you can see, I am making a mess of it a little bit. They are moving, they're getting dislodged. But slowly, they are coming together. Right, so we've come to the end of the Aperture blades. We've got the last one in there, and now we've got the extra tricky, fiddly task of placing one under placing the last one under the first one. So, best thing to do is to straighten them all out so you can see what you're doing and where you're going. And then move them. Don't worry about dirtying the lens underneath, because that one doesn't affect the aperture blades. You can take that one out later, and you won't need to worry about these. So this one, that one has to slide underneath this one. I may need 2 cocktail sticks here. Didn't get it that time. I'm sorry it's a long video, folks, but I think to describe how to do this in any other way, it just wouldn't have the same effect. We have to carefully, very carefully, put that underneath that one. And there we go. They're pretty much done. All we have to do now, there is one last thing. We have to line up these little dimples to this thing that we took off earlier. And we have to make sure that we remember where it went in the lens. I'd give it a clean before you put it in, though. It doesn't need to be a brilliant clean, but I probably will shine it up a bit more. I'll pause it here and give it a bit of a blast, I think. So there, giving it a bit of a blast. And which way round did it go? Where did it go? Luckily for me, I've got another lens that I can just have a look at. But I think it was somewhere around the red line on the outside of the case that lined up with one of these. Now, once you've got the idea of where you took that from, now sometimes to do this you can video yourself as you're sort of disassembling the lens, or you can just make a note, or just try and remember. But if you do forget, the other way of doing it is just to look at another lens. If you happen to have a similar lens, then you'll see which way it goes. I mean, it will only fit in a certain way. It's tricky getting it to sit right because it's quite a tight fit. And you have to be roughly right. You don't have to be precise. You know, if you get it into the rough location of where it was before, that's the starting part. And then all you have to do then is make sure that those dimples fit snugly into those holes. Now, you'll usually find that you can get 1 or 2 in, and the others won't fit. You've got to kind of nudge them in. And you can do that with a pin sometimes, or something sharp. You can just kind of nudge each one in. Now it will be a bit tricky, this. It does take a little bit of fiddling. And before you walk away and think that you've done it, make sure that you test it. You can easily put your finger on these, hold them down, and give it a little test to see if it'll actually open and close. Just slightly. You don't have to open them, close them fully. You know, just see if the mechanism works. It's a very time-consuming process. It's very fiddly, very laborious. You need some you need to be very dexterous, don't you, to do this. Manual dexterity. And is it worth it for a £20 lens? I think so. I mean, it's quite an easy thing to do if you can, spend half an hour or so messing about. I think it's a lot more rewarding than doing a jigsaw puzzle. Now it's just the reverse of what we did before. So we need to line this up to roughly where it was before. And we need to put that little piece back in. Now this can be a little bit tricky because what we don't want to happen is we don't want the ring that we just placed onto the aperture, we don't want that coming loose and having to redo it again. So you need to put one finger or two fingers into the barrel there while you try and position the components on the outside. So I'm going to put this in place first. That'll hold everything down. I'm sorry this is such a long video as well. It's just, I think it helps to have a full video rather than cutting bits out or speeding things up. I think sometimes you need to see everything, especially if you're following along, or you don't want to open these things up and find that there's something missing. There's some procedure or element to repairing the lens that wasn't included. So I'm trying to put everything there step by step as I've done it. In real time, I suppose. So you have to be careful here because you need to place it from underneath into that little hole. It's easy enough to do. It's not difficult. There's plenty of space in this lens to work on. You don't have to be super firm when you tighten these up either. You can just tighten them so they're fairly tight. The lens isn't going to encounter any extreme circumstances usually. Usually these things aren't on the camera all the time. They're just used now and again, so I don't think they're going to have much chance to vibrate free. But I wouldn't tighten them up too much because when it comes to reopening or cleaning the lens again, you don't want to be really forcing these things. You can break the threads, you can break the slot on top, and it's just not worth going to that kind of extreme. It's something that's nice to do, at the end of the night when there's nothing else to do. You got the TV on in the background perhaps, or a bit of music, and you can have a nice drink of whiskey, or you can enjoy a nice drink, and it's very much like a puzzle, isn't it? Where you can just enjoy yourself, get lost in assembling the lens, and just treat it like a puzzle, because at the end, instead of getting a pretty picture, you actually get a nice working lens. So it's fully serviced. This lens is going to be fully serviced now and working perfectly. So, on top of being, a nice vintage lens, it's going to be in really great condition too. And I wonder, after doing all of this, will it still underperform the Tessar lens, the other Tessar, the Zebra? That'll be interesting, won't it? To find out whether it's still blurry. I suspect that it probably will be. I don't think the fungus, and I don't think the particles in the lens was that bad. I don't think they were really terrible. Although when you're looking through that torch, it does look awful, doesn't it? But it's I think it just really accentuates all the little bits that are there, and I don't think it's really as bad a lot of the time. I mean, if a lot of sellers on the internet showed the LED torch blasting through their lenses before they sold them, I think it put a lot of people off, because it makes the lens look really dirty. But like I said earlier, you're not going to be able to get this perfect. You're not going to be able to clean these absolute perfect, because unless you've got a special environment to do it in. I mean, if you're working in your kitchen or your study or perhaps your bedroom or living room, then there is going to be dust in the air. There's always going to be dust in the air while you're working on these things, and it's going to be really difficult to keep the dust away. You can see it works, and I think I've introduced a tiny little blob of contaminant onto that aperture ring, but it's nothing to worry about. I'm not going to redo all of that. I can see a tiny little spot there of discoloration, and it could be a bit of grease off my finger, it could be on the glove from the inside of the lens, but I'm not going to worry about that too much. It's such a tiny amount. I often look for the quick videos. Say if I've got a lens and I want to open it and clean something or do something, then my first port of call is YouTube, and I look for the videos that are the shortest, because I don't want to spend half an hour watching a video just to find out how to get the third lens out or something. So I'm a bit unsure about this video, because it is an extra long video. It's half an hour to replace the blades. But if you want to do this and you've struggled with anything else, you've struggled with other videos and you're not sure, you're not confident, then this video shows you it all, shows everything, every aspect of doing this. Now, when I pulled this lens apart, I noticed that this area here, the black part, had been peeled off. Now, that could be that somebody has tried to open the lens and tried to get into it the wrong way around, but really this area here needs to be painted. So I'm using a felt pen. It's a permanent marker, and I'm going to be painting the side of the lens here black, and that will stop any of the excess light coming in and bouncing around where it shouldn't go. Now, I've got a little bit of paint on the actual lens itself, but that's nothing to worry about. A little bit of alcohol will sort that out. It'll take it off. So make sure you just paint the rim here if it's not already blackened. Just make it a little bit darker. I'll go over this once or twice with this pen, because it's just a normal felt pen, permanent marker felt pen. You can paint it, you can, it's up to you. This will do the same thing. This might help the lens as well. I mean, it could be the reason why it was a bit soft, or appeared to be a bit soft. I don't know. It's not difficult, it's just time consuming, and but if you really enjoy doing this kind of thing, if you have the patience, then it's worth doing. So we need to remove this bit now, the bit that I smudged on the lens there. And with a cotton swab, a little cotton swab with a bit of alcohol on there, IPA, rubbing alcohol, it'll just wipe off in one go. Now, Sometimes it can be still wet and it might come off with a cocktail stick, but for this time, this occasion, I will need IPA on this. And look at that. Bang, and the dirt is gone. I know you can't see what I'm doing exactly, but it's just off camera there. It is just the cotton swab, and I'm just using one end and then switching to the dry end. Just being careful, extra careful, not to wipe off the pen from beyond the rim. You can see that it's collecting a lot of that from the lens. You can end up polishing these to infinity because it can be kind of like a mania cleaning lenses. You know, sometimes I've spent all afternoon on a Sunday just cleaning the same lens. It's it can be really tricky sometimes and really frustrating. But when we look at it, we can see that it's a lot cleaner than it was. Maybe give it a lint-free cloth just to make sure that there's no little bits, no little hairs lying around, or even get a paintbrush and just give it a little wipe. Yeah, it's a pity, isn't it? Look at that on the Aperture blade there. How could I have done that? But anyway, it's not terrible. It'll do. It'll be fine. So to put this back in, it's actually quite easy, and by screwing this back in, it actually holds all of that in place. It holds the aperture and the mechanism nice and tight into the lens barrel. So you can drop it in, and you can use your calipers or you can use your tweezers. Now I'm putting my finger right in the centre of the tweezers and just holding them in just the right position and spinning the lens around to screw this in. Now you might have a lens spanner available. I don't actually have one. I tend not to use them. I might get them as I do more with lenses, but the tools I'm using at the moment seem to work okay. And there you go. You know, that's beautiful. So it all works and it's all clean. So theoretically we should have a better picture out of this now. Remember to put the ball bearing back in the right place. And turn the lens upside down to fit it. And keep in mind where the slot goes. You may have to move the slot to the right place. But if you do it the other way, the ball bearing could easily fall out. There you go, you can hear it clicking. It's really easy. It is really easy to do. And then of course you just put back the Pixelvalve adapter if that's what you're using. I may actually pause it and finish this off camera in a minute. But it's a bit fiddly getting these in and getting them to go. Because even though you can't see what I'm doing, I can't see what I'm doing either. I'm just kind of... my head's obscured by the camera and I'm kind of in my own light. It's a little bit awkward, but there is only 3 screws and they're only small screws. It's not an awful job. I think anyone could do this, really. I don't think there's much to it. And, you know, for a £20 lens, you know, it's a great way to give it a go, isn't it? So if you wanted to try out what a vintage lens on a Nikon was like, then I would say this is a really good entry-level way of doing it. A Tessar, it's the easiest. And it gives you some fantastic images too. I honestly think that the Tessar can easily compete with the Flectagon. I know lots of people will laugh at that, but I think it's very close. And just screw on the front. Now if you want to, you can clean the back element. Now it just depends if it's dirty. Now I did dirty this one because I was working on it and debris and things probably fell inside. And I will clean the back element. What I'm using here is just a normal set of measuring calipers. I use these for quite a lot of lenses and they work brilliantly. You can expand them to the right amount, and oftentimes you don't need any force with these things. You just need a very slight force, and then you can use your fingers or a cocktail stick to carry on with the motion. You see, usually these lenses have been opened 1,000,000 times before you get them anyway. I should have been a surgeon, shouldn't I? I think the blue gloves suit me. So what we've got here is another plano-convex lens, I think. And I'm using the hydrogen peroxide again. If there was any fungus on this side, and I didn't notice any on this side, the back end, but if there was any, that will kill it. Now this lens I will probably list on eBay at some point as a lens for Nikon, if anyone wanted it. Now I probably will do that in the next few months, so keep an eye out on eBay if you want this lens, if you want to bid on it, because it's fully serviced and it's totally clean, and it has a Nikon adapter. Well, Nikon adapter, it's converted expertly to Nikon, I suppose, and it's probably one of the very few in existence. So it's well worth the grab if you can find it and get it. Now, I think that's pretty clean. Yeah, I think that's pretty clean. I think that's clean enough. Now, I'm pushing this in with my rubber glove, but I couldn't do that with my finger because the finger would leave a mark on the glass. So it's important when doing this kind of work that you do use rubber gloves. And it can be a little bit tricky to get that to sit right while you're twisting it. But Once you've got it in on one sort of run, you can tighten it easy. And there we go. This Tessar has been completely and utterly cleaned. It's in pristine condition, and we should be able to get some lovely shots using this. I might do a comparison again. I might take some shots later to show you what they're like. In actual fact, I could actually do that and stick them at the end of the video, couldn't I? Maybe a quick little compare and see how it stands up now. And here we are. This is the comparison. So on the right side we've got the dirty lens, the shot from the actual video that we had before, the Tessar, the Black Tessar, while it was blurry. And on the left side we've got the shot that I took after cleaning the lens. I think you can definitely see that there is a sharpness to the cleaned version. Now, it's not perfectly sharp, but it's definitely sharper than the shot we took in the last video. Now, there's a bit of glow surrounding the dirty lens, and I think that's probably because of the haze in that lens. The corners are pretty much the same, they look very similar, but the centre of the screen seems to have a definite improvement. Now the settings are pretty much the same, although some of the settings are slightly different. The shutter speed will be different, the time of day would be different, so it's not going to be a precise, exact comparison. But the f-stop is both 2.8, they're both wide open, and it's very similar conditions. Now, in the distance here, can we resolve as much detail? Now, it is very hazy on both lenses, but the cleaned version, it's actually very bright because the sunshine is beaming against those brilliant white buildings, and we are open wide. But looking at this building here, I can see that we're looking at the same area. This building here does seem to have more detail, so that's the cleaned version is actually resolving more of the detail, I think. Now, what do you think? That lens has been cleaned. Obviously, that there's not a massive difference between them, but I think it actually compares to the Zebra lens now. Very similar, in fact. So, if you've enjoyed the video, if it was useful, like, share, subscribe, and leave some comments. Thanks for watching.